Welcome back to the ReidConnect-Ed Podcast. This season, we've been interviewing interesting individuals who have their own unique path toward excellence. In each interview, we've tied in themes of performance psychology, relationships, mental health, and learning as a way to bring light to the process behind the scenes. Today, we're so excited to have Joe Perella, otherwise known as Joe P., join us virtually from his Bat Cave in New Jersey. Joe P. is a singer-songwriter, formerly the lead of the band Deal Casino, who is a rising star who has always shone bright in our eyes and has been touring across the country and Europe to share the music he's mostly created in his basement. So you may know him from the stage, music streaming platforms, or social media posts from his basement or backyard. To say his path has been unique is an understatement. I'm not even sure we can exactly label which category or genre your music fits into, but we can say with certainty that Joe P. rocks a show like none other. He's got an awesome voice, his style is super creative, and he is so genuine. Teamed with his presence and connection to the music, his sound is contagious. Joe has a following and fans that show unwavering loyalty and enthusiastically sing his songs as if they've known them for decades. Joe P. just has it, the je ne sais quoi. Although Joe P. is super accomplished in his field, it's important to note that we try to bring on guests to the podcast who really respect the work that they do. And not only do we see their successes, but we really respect them as individuals, not just for their successes and accomplishments, but because of their experiences, perspective, wisdom, inspiration, and character. And with that all being said, we want to welcome our cousin, the one, the only,
Joe P.
Hello. What's up, everybody?
We were joking before we started that it's ironic that Jerry and I are here in studio on Newbury Street in Boston, Massachusetts, right around the corner from the infamous Berklee School of Music, where Joe,
that's right.
After high school, had a little experience.
Yeah, so you know what? My path to excellence began right there. So there you go.
Well, whether or not Berklee was the impetus for the path to excellence, I think your time here kind of solidified who you are musically, the things that you knew you wanted to do, and the path to get you there. I almost feel like, and I remember you coming up in high school with Emily to visit Boston and to check things out. And when you were here, though you were super immersed in pretty much everything you did, we did get to see a few shows together when you were here. But I know that you also figured out what you did like, what worked for you and what didn't. I think that's such an important part of the process. And I really want us to hone in on this because in my work, Joe, I really help people, especially learners, to say like what does and doesn't work. Sometimes we feel like we have to get pigeonholed in one aspect of things or another. And sometimes that stifles our whole passion and purpose and that whole path towards wherever we're supposed to end up. So, just to kind of get things started off, I know we were joking a little bit about college and, college isn't for everybody. And in fact, sometimes that defeats the purpose of us working towards our goals. So tell us a little bit about how you found your music. You can talk about Berklee to start or go all the way back to first time you picked up a guitar.
Sure. I guess it really started when I was really little because music and guitar was like, when you're that little, you're that young, 5 years old or something. A guitar and singing and a piano is just like an extension of like your toy chest, right? So I had like Hot Wheels cars, I had Legos, and there was a little piano in there. Like that's what, it was kind of like weird subliminal, whatever it was, because I've seen home videos of me and I'm like playing with like trains and stuff. And there's like a stupid little drum and a piano. And I'm like, wait a minute, I was getting brainwashed to love music at that young. That's crazy. Yeah. So I didn't see I never saw, there was no, because now it's funny when a lot of like people, adults, or even like, if you're in, high school, and you start learning an instrument, you're a little more self-aware, which can cause you to think of things as like, oh, I have to go practice, or today I'm going to sit down and practice guitar, like things like that, and be disciplined. when you're little, like you don't need discipline. You have to be disciplined when you're little. You have no idea how to discipline yourself. So if you're doing something like playing an instrument, you're just fully free, I think, to like actually just go into it as purely as you can. Like any kid, like how we always say kids are kind of the most, they have the most pure outlook on the world.
Yeah.
That applies to when you start playing music. So eventually it just kind of, I got lucky and like that, it was blurry and just went right into like that a little more, 8th grade, freshman year, high school, where you start to become a little more self-aware. But I still didn't think of it as like, oh, I'm going to practice today. It was just like, oh, I'm going to keep doing this toy. It's still a toy to me. It's still this stupid, fun, playful thing. And when I started realizing like you can make songs or, we can, my friends, we started a band and, in like 8th grade and we could be in the talent show and we can, there was just this weird like magic. It was like magic where I was like, we can just get together and try to rehearse. And if we do everything right, it's going to sound a certain way. That's so cool. Like what a simple concept, but like what a fun, like it was like living in a video game, right? Because at that age, I should have been really into video games. But because I had this, I wasn't as into those kinds of things or like movies and stuff. Like I just was like, we can do this in a garage. The stuff people see in like, YouTube videos and movies all day. Like we can like make magic. Like let's do it. So I think that was the beginning of loving being in a band or creating. You know what I mean? Like rather than just I need to learn guitar and study the greats. Like I love guitar playing so much. Eventually that kind of ended and it became a little more about like, well, what if, I want to be able to perform. I want to be able to be on stage and have something to say or have something to show. So that started with like talent shows and little contests and things, battle of the bands. Like you get your first little like adrenaline rush, I think, of being in front of strangers or people and being super vulnerable. It's like it's a very like it was a very, when I look back on it now, I realize how kind of like you need to force yourself to grow up only in the sense of like that discipline area a little earlier than everyone else around you. Like I felt like when I look back at like freshman year of high school and so on, I feel like a Friday night party would come up and I had the thing in my brain that sometimes would go, yeah, I want to go to that party because you're in high school. Like, what are you doing? Or I would also sometimes just as easily go like, you know what? I got really into this thing I started like making. Like I'm going to just stay home tonight, which is weird. It's a weird thing to do when you're like 17.
I'd say it's
and
kind
you can
of
drive
amazing.
and you can go. Yeah. Well, no, I'm happy about it. I'm so happy that I had that because I think like all that time by myself, I was able to learn a lot about myself without knowing it, because I'm at that like, you're a sponge when you're really little. And then it doesn't really end, until maybe like after college. Like you really are a sponge in different ways throughout. So I feel like even in high school, I was a sponge sitting in my room alone now, and I didn't know what I was kind of like absorbing by being there and being cool with just being alone and happy with that and content and not like, I need to be with people and like, I need to drink. Like everyone was drinking and I wasn't really drinking that much. And I felt weird because I was like, I want to be, it's like anything else. Like everyone's wearing those sneakers. Like I should be wearing those sneakers, right? When you're in that age. And like, so maybe I should be doing this too, but I just couldn't, I never fell into like peer pressure or anything like that. I think because I knew I had me in my room alone. Like I had that like lesson that I taught myself of like, oh, I'm okay with like being the weirdo. That's what's weird. You're okay with being the weirdo in your room like that. If you could do that, you could do anything. Like you're able to handle any situation. You know what I mean? It's like ultimate confidence, I think. So that just became that. And then going to Berkeley in college was just like, everyone just goes to college. It was like everyone's going to prom. I'm going to go. Everyone's going to college. Like there was no actually like thought about it as much as it was just like, okay, I have to do this thing now. This is like what my parents have been talking about forever, and everyone talks about it all. For senior year, and your guidance counselors are telling you, what do you think? Where are you going to go? And you're at the age where again, your brain is just thinking in terms of like, I always think it's so funny how I was asked to make, however much money decision of where I'm going to go to college. So it's kind of, I just think it's a little like twisted that we expect kids like senior year or whatever, 17 years old, 18, like to be making those kinds of decisions in a way that it's like, this will determine the rest of your life. And, so what do you think? But also, oh, I heard, you think your life's over because that girl broke up with you that you dated for a month. It's like your brain just isn't there yet. You shouldn't be in that. You shouldn't be in the driver's seat with that, or, which I don't even think, I think that's one of the big things that threw me off was like, oh my God, college determines the rest of your life. It's so scary that it almost scares you into like, I'm just going to go. You know what I mean? You're like, I can't not go. I can't fall behind. And then after it's been done, I've realized that like when I have a kid, I'm so not going to put that, not pressure, but I'm not going to put that thought in their head. I don't think of like this decision, where you go, what you major in, what you decide to do determines the rest of your life. It's like you go to college and you could take another 4 years after college and another 4 years and still have a totally new path. It's like there's there is so much time to figure out what you want to do and how you want to do it, that the idea of those 4 years, like being the whole thing, is so strange to me. You know what I mean? I just don't think we should put that much pressure on it. So, but when I went there, I thought it was a way to make my parents happy.
I just want to say that what you're saying is so validating for a lot of individuals, Alexis, I work with. We really appreciate you being on the other end of it and looking back, and because when you're in it, you can't think any differently, because this is your life. You can't have the perspective. So for you to share that is so valuable. But I want to pull back a little bit before you get into like post college and all that stuff, because there's so much that is said in childhood. And Alexis and I remember being with you during the holidays and stuff when you started to really get into the guitar, and how passionate you were about it. It was so refreshing. Like, it's so refreshing when you see someone who genuinely just really is into something, and it's so genuine, it's real. It's not for show. It's just because you love it. And I'm going to refer back to an episode we had this season for a very elite hockey player. She said something very similar that you said. She said when she was younger, she felt different, but she found hockey was something she just loved doing. She just wanted to do it for fun. She was out there all day long, just doing drills, finding other people who were like her to enjoy that with. And if they didn't, to be like, okay, maybe we're just not meant to hang out together because we have different passions. And I feel like you're very similar in that way. You found people to play, in your garage with, and to just experiment with the music with, and to be fully absorbed with it. So, I just want to ask you, like, how did that feel? Because there's a very organic way of learning about yourself. There's a really good lyric by Stephen Kellogg. He says something like, whatever you see on the screen is also something you can experience in real life. And your quote actually said something like that, right?
Yeah.
Like people are watching YouTube videos about things that are happening, but actually you can go experience that in real life if you wanted to, and have the courage to go out there and to discover yourself and your passions. So just wanted to hear, how that felt for you and your comments on that.
Yeah. I think like, again, you're at an age where you're so not self-aware yet. You're not aware that you're disciplined enough to schedule a band practice. Like, I didn't know I was doing that. I just thought, we're doing a band practice. Like, let's all get together, and then if someone was, late or was like not into it, I would have to be like, come on, like we got to get into it. I was like a manager at like a restaurant almost, you know what I mean? Like in this weird miniature way. I was like, I became this like band leader, but I didn't know it. I didn't know I'm the leader of this band and it's my job to make sure everyone does their job. Like I had no clue that that's what was happening. So I would just, you would just have a band practice, then it would get over and then you would go and then it was like, okay, now we're all going to like so-and-so's like graduation party, or like, we're going to just do like kid stuff now, and it was weird though that there was, whenever the band practice thing happened, it was like this very disciplined thing to do for four guys to get together and like work on something for a couple of hours and try to get really good at it and focus in on it like super, super hard to the point where we got it. And then when it was done, it was almost like we would go back to like being a Tom Hanks. It was like the beginning of that movie, and then he's big, and that's our band practice. And then when he goes back and he's wearing he has all the giant clothes on, that's what I felt like after the band practice. It felt like we like grew up 10 years to do this like disciplined thing of like, let's get this together. And then we would get done and it was like, okay, let's go play somewhere again. You know, we were back to being like kids again. So it's weird. It's a weird thing, but you could see that in sports in high school. Like there were kids that I remember thinking like, it's amazing that these kids are staying after school. I quit after a year or two of basketball in high school because I didn't want to get yelled at by a coach anymore. And I thought it was so crazy that I was like, I would like make jokes out of it. I would be trying to like, I just thought it was an extension of school. I didn't want to be told what to do. Right. So, but I remember looking back now, the kids that were really into it, like the star players who like would be like, come on, Joe, like you're like messing around, like take this seriously. That was me in the band. Like that was my serious thing. I couldn't understand. Like I wish I could go back in time now and almost like appreciate those kids who were so into being an athlete because they were doing the same thing. Like the crazy stuff kids would do that it was like, you know, that takes so much discipline and so much like work and effort. And you kind of have to turn off your kid brain. You know, you have to turn off that, like, let's just have fun brain for a little bit to do something. That's interesting. And it's the same thing with really good students in school. I think when you see the kids who were great students, I look back now and it's like, they were just really, really disciplined. I wouldn't even like, I used to think, oh, they're just so much smarter than me. So that's why I can't do well in school. But now I look back, I'm like, oh, I could do so well in school now if I knew what I knew now.
Yeah.
I just didn't want to try. I just didn't want to try or be disciplined enough to listen or to sit there and do the work. But I look back, I'm like, it was so easy. All you had to do was like pay attention a little bit, do some work, and like the answers are right there for you, you know. And the kids that were good at that, I don't know if they were necessarily that much smarter than me now that I think about it. It was more so that I think they were just like ahead of their maturity of like, I need to sit here and like work on this, right? So I think there were versions of it everywhere, you know, and the band was like, I couldn't find it anywhere else. I couldn't find it in sports because I was the guy who was like the weakest player and like the weakest mindset of like, I don't want to get yelled at by this like grown adult in between, you know, games and stuff. And then school was the same thing where I was like, well, that's the smart kid. I'm not the smart kid. And again, I also didn't feel a sense of like being an individual, I think, in school, because I felt like, I remember thinking like, wait a minute. So best case scenario, I can get straight A's, but that's still the thing that's set for me. Like the best I can do is still a bar that's set, that it's like, even if I hit that, it's someone else's like threshold of like, this is what's good. And I remember thinking like, I'm not that inspired by that. I didn't know at the time, but I think that was a thing eating at me slowly, was like, I couldn't have a drive. I didn't have a drive to do it because it was just like it was like seeing the finish line as opposed to like, just run as fast as you can until you get to the end. You know what I mean? And I didn't feel anything from that. Where the band, it was like the needle only got pushed if I made it go. And then it was like chopping with a machete. Like you couldn't, as soon as you went a little bit, there's another wall and it's like, now what are we going to do? I don't know, you know. And school felt more like a really long road that you can see the finish line way over there. And it's just a matter of like, are you going to stop running? Are you going to keep going? But you're with a bunch of people. And I didn't like that sense of, you know, best case scenario, I'm just like everyone else. That's what I remember thinking. And I was like, you know, I wanted my parents to be happy, so I wanted to do well in school. But that was the other thing. It was just for that. It was just for other people. It was always like, do well in school because that's what you're supposed to do. And like, if I only had a reason, like now, if I could go back, I would find a reason in a second to want to do well. But they don't teach you that in school. They don't teach you how to view school. Like, I think it would be so beneficial if they sat everyone down or found a way to just let everyone know.
So funny,
like,
Joey. That's. I think that's what your cousin Alexis does. So strange.
Oh yeah, there you go. Yeah, that's what I mean. I wish I had you. That would have been. I know. I say that all the time. I'm
like, I wish I had an Alexis when I was younger. But you know, you bring up so many important points, and developmentally, you know, Jerry brought up what the hockey player on our podcast had mentioned to Mia about when she became so inspired by sport, right? And it's, you're using the word weird. I think you're probably saying that because it was against the grain of what was quote unquote normal back then, where you grew up in New Jersey. And, you know, I get that. We get that. when you do something different, it always does feel a little weird and uncomfortable because it might be unfamiliar territory and things that we're not used to. I mean, as a kid, I think the beauty of, I'm going to speak for myself, but also for you a little bit here and chime in if I'm wrong. I think the beauty of the way we were raised is that we had some freedom to explore and dive deep when we felt the passion to do that. And this quote unquote thing you're calling weird, I think that was more of like you had this inspiration to be able to dive deep. And the thing that you were talking about in terms of learning and studying, you were doing that, just not the way school was telling you to.
Right? Exactly.
You were becoming a master student at music.
100%. That's true.
Yeah. No, so that's the thing. It's so funny because I would play guitar for 8 hours on like weekend days and stuff. I would play for all day. I would not stop. And weekdays I'd come home and they'd have to call me for dinner because it was so loud. They would be like knocking on my door, So like I was always practicing. And I think like at a certain point, my parents did kind of like get that. I think because I remember they took my guitar away from me in order to like push me to like, you'll get it back when you like start taking school more seriously. Like that was, they thought that was going to work. And I thought it was too. That's what was weird. I remember they did that and I thought like, oh yeah, this is genius. This is going to be the thing that makes me do better in school.
You thought that back in high school?
And I didn't. And I did, yeah. And I didn't do better at all. I did the same thing. And I think it was like one of those funny moments where we were almost, me and my parents were all kind of sitting there like, what the hell? I thought that was going to be the thing that worked. And I was like, honestly, me too. Like, I can't believe this. And, but I think that was also a good realization of like, it was like this proof that like, you cannot force those kinds of things. You cannot force someone to work harder at something or whatever, because like, then I would, when because I remember they gave me the guitar back. They're like, all right, yeah, whatever, I guess go back, let's back to status quo. And like, I think, and I went right back to playing guitar for 8 hours a day. And they were probably like,
well, here's a little parenting tip.
He does have discipline.
Yeah. Just not for schoolwork. No. But I have to say, and this is for our listeners who might be caregivers who we're going to have them listen to this episode and hear a different perspective, because oftentimes I think parents get into that trap that you're saying, like, everybody has to do well in school and then go to college and then be successful in a career. And I think that, when you zoom out and you look at people who are really successful, and we've been fortunate enough to have a lot of people on the show this season to talk about their experiences, oftentimes it wasn't just a straightforward path, and there were a lot of ups and downs and zigs and zags. But from a parenting perspective, if you see and notice, your kid isn't doing well in school, the thing not to do is take away the thing they love the most. It sounds like it's a good punishment, but really that like, it's almost like taking off your arm and telling you to swim, right? It's like without that arm, you'll figure it out if you really want to do well, if you want that back. But it's like, you got to find a different motivator that is going to connect to the goal. So if the goal is to do well in school and learning, you really want to target something that allows for them to find motivation within themselves to do well. Because like you might have been pushed in a different way to connect with school differently than you were before, because you were so deeply invested in music, which is such a beautiful thing. And I think that a lot of kids, especially today, if a kid is really excited about music, what do the parents tend to do? They put them in 1 million hours of music lessons or, different classes and stuff, rather than like, here, find your friends who like to do music, hang out in the garage for a couple hours a day and figure it out. Giving them that time to explore. And of course, there's skill involved that not everybody's going to pick up a guitar and pretty much, how many instruments do you play now, Joe?
I don't know, like 6 or something like that.
Pretty much all of them, as I've noticed, if you want to. But really though, like there's skill involved, and sometimes that extra training is helpful. Don't get me wrong. And I know I talked about this too in terms of hockey development, but for a musician, there might be some skill and training, but really it's about that exploration and having that joy and a joy in learning, which I think gets sucked out of the school system so quickly.
Well, I think too, Joe, is that
it does.
I think that there's an added element that we know you pretty well. You're a creative dude who like thinks outside of the box, and not everyone's like you too, right? So some kids may prefer kind of a more structured learning environment for what they're doing.
Yeah.
And I think that the message here in some ways is like figure out who the kid is. And what a beautiful thing that over time, like your family.
Yeah.
We've been blessed to have people in our family and extended family that really want the best for us and believe in us.
Yeah.
And want us to to be great at what we're doing. And so it's cool that this added element that you discover who you are. You are that creative dude who can do stuff like this and be great at it and to enjoy it.
Yeah. It's it's like it's just an awkward age when you're in high school or 8th grade or whatever to be doing all this stuff, because like if you are the kind of person who's being drawn to something, it's weird because it's a weird age for everyone, because your brain is just not developed enough to be able to deal with the emotions that come with it, right? Necessarily. And almost the thing itself is the only hope as far as, like your brain has all this stuff in it that it wants to, feel and get out. And because you're not developed enough, you can't. So this music thing or sports or whatever is a nice outlet. It's like this outlet to let all that, like, we're not ready for that yet energy kind of go somewhere. And then you have your parents or something where they're seeing you in 8th grade or freshman year, and you're starting to get into this very specific thing, and they're probably excited, but also like, what do we do? We don't know how to deal with it, and it's also, I think, worth saying how that me, in 8th grade, it was one of the first times like that was one of the first generational kind of like shifts, I think, where like you're having kids, like my parents were not that different from their parents as far as like how they grew up, right? But how I grew up and like the world I grew up in is so different than the world my parents grew up in, right? And I think it's the first time in history it was ever that different. You had the internet, like, and social media starting to come out, and so there's all these things where like the idea of like the 50s versus the 60s with like the parents not understanding like rock and roll was like nothing compared to like what we are now dealing with. And it's just, I think every generation that goes by, it's getting more and more, there's more, deeper things to go into that. It's like, well, we didn't have that when we were kids. So how do we deal with that with our kids? But I think, like that had some kind of like contribution or effect on how I think like someone like my parents had to navigate that, because they were like, well, the whole point of like us being in the 80s and 90s was like have kids and like make sure they go to college. Like, like that's what we're all trying to put, like get your kids to college so that they can get a degree and get a job. And like when that era came along where, you start having the internet and things, and kids are expressing themselves more, I think, because, parents are getting a little more open to things slowly. Like now there's these new avenues opening up, and now the parents are going, I didn't even know what I don't know how to tell you not to do this.
Right.
Like taking the guitar away. They didn't know, they had no clue. They were like, this is a new thing. We don't know how to parent you, and it's like, that is kind of crazy for them to have to navigate that. And then it's them not knowing how to navigate it. They've known how to navigate everything before that moment. So now you're looking at your parents kind of like, I don't know what to do because you don't know what to do, and there's this weird like clash, but I think it's also like a great thing. I think when that's happening, you let you're being more people and less, I'm your parent, you're my kid. And I think that's when good stuff happens. You know what I mean?
Totally. And it's the exploration together to figure it out, and you're right. Like developmentally, your brain isn't ready yet to make these big decisions, even though you're pushed in a direction.
No.
And it's so cool that you had the space to decide for yourself, like, this is something I love. I'm going to dedicate time and effort towards. And in fact, it opened up a lot of different avenues and some great friendships along the way. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But then on the other end, you had the support to be able to, try something new, move to a new city, try to get technically trained. And again, going back to my original point of like what works and what doesn't. And I think that's something that we need to give time and space to for ourselves as adults, but especially for children to explore and figure out, so you really can get on a path where you feel good about the decisions you make and you feel like you're on a path that feels right, that you can do forever instead of just something that becomes a job.
Yeah. Yeah. No, 100%. And I think parents are getting better, I think, overall, at when their kid has something that they're leaning towards or an interest or whatever, it's like, kind of just get out of the way in a healthy way enough that it's like, cool, I can parent everything. I can do everything else around this. I can still guide my kid or whatever. But it's almost like because it was almost like when we'd have band practice, it was just kind of like, they almost disappeared. Like my parents to me were now just like the people that own this house that I was like doing this like thing in. Right.
Yeah.
But like, as soon as it was over, it was like, you got to take out the garbage. Right. So it was I think that's the idea. It's not that they have to completely like dislocate from the thing that you do, but it's almost like they need to recognize that it's like, oh, my kid is parenting themselves when they're doing this one tiny thing. Like, let them parent themselves as far as like, they have to navigate this themselves because I can't do it for them. Right. And then, everything else, sure, you got a guide, you have to help, but everything else around that is one thing, but the very specific, niche thing that they're doing is almost like, be happy that that I think is like a tiny, tiny window as a parent that you're getting to see into your kid's future. Like that's the only part of me that has not changed at all since the first time I still, like, I'm having band practice tonight. It's the exact same that it was when I was in 7th grade.
But I love how you said it's a window into your future. But I know Alexis wants to get into some next stages of your life. This has been an incredible conversation.
And to wrap up what you were saying too, I think that structure and flexibility is key, not just as a parent with your children, but in our lives in general, right? You need to have some foundational structure and then allow for flexibility to be there and to have that happen. And I think that's, as you were describing, your band practices in high school, it's the same idea. It's like, you got to have that freedom where you can build independence and confidence in yourself doing something you love and to do it well. Yeah. But there still's got to be some structure to build that discipline. It doesn't come from nowhere. And
as we said in our last episode about expanding the idea of happiness, there's research on that's where self-esteem comes from.
Totally.
When you are focused on what you're doing and you enjoy what you're doing, like I'm sure that time of your life, you had your self-esteem probably really increased. I don't want to speak for you, but it probably did. And you also had the play and being a kid to balance that out. So you're not just you're not just doing one thing all the time. So that was really nice to hear. I'm sure your self-esteem skyrocketed at that point. Am I wrong about that?
Yeah, it was like, that was my superpower because I wasn't the smart kid. I was a little bit of like the funny kid, a little bit like in school. Like I found a way to like, because I wasn't good at anything. Like I wasn't like the star athlete or the like perfect this, that. It was like, okay, I'll use humor to kind of like make my way into the room. And that helped. And then the music just kind of like was this other thing that came with it. And it was an identity. It was that's the thing. When you're a kid, like you're so sensitive to those things that if like you play a talent show and everyone comes up to you, and scream, it's like, that's so like, I'll never forget the first time a crowd like cheered or clapped for something I did. And it's like, it's just like a visceral, it goes into you and you're just like, whoa. And it's not in a way that you're like, oh, I love applause and like your ego. Right. You're not old enough to have an ego.
Right.
So it's more like, it's this idea of like, it's the first time you do something that you fully do for yourself. And then all of a sudden all these people go, yeah, we love that. And then you go, really? And then you love it more because it's just,
you're sharing it.
It's just confirming that. Yeah. It's confirming how much you love it. You know what I mean? It's like, it's like when someone claps for you for doing something that you love doing for yourself that you would do if everyone in the world disappeared and you were left like I Am Legend, like Will Smith style. Like if you were totally alone on the planet, what would you do? I would still play music, right? Yeah. But obviously there's shows because there's other people. And then when they clap or they like what you do or connect to it, even for that matter, you're like, you just are so, it's not an ego thing. It's like, you're just so happy to confirm that identity. Like you are so sure of it, but when someone else connects to it, you're like, it's almost like you're able to like have an out of body and see yourself as like, oh yeah, you are something to other people. Like they can see that thing. It's not just like this wacky world in your own head, you know?
It must feel like you're creating and you're contributing to people around you, and you're sharing that. I feel like those are the words that are coming to my mind.
Yeah.
You're creating something that didn't exist.
Yeah.
You're sharing it, and you're contributing to the people around you. You're making, you know, and you're sharing it. It's just like profound, really. It's exactly what Jelani said in some ways about his first time acting. And he was a late bloomer with acting and kind of took a unique path too. So yeah. It's amazing how these themes really kind of cross paths.
And I have to say, I know you just said probably like 5 times I wasn't the smart one, but as long as I know you've been wise and mature beyond your years. And maybe it didn't fit into the school box because you didn't want to do what they wanted you to do, but that doesn't mean you weren't smart.
Yeah.
I'll have to say some of my favorite conversations with you are just like literally just talking about deep, insightful, philosophical things about the world. And you have so much to share even outside of your music. So I'm glad we're having this conversation. And I want to go back to this idea of like structure and creativity because, you know, I think that has a lot to say, and you and Jerry can speak about this way more than I can. There's a lot to say about structure and flexibility in songwriting. And I'm curious about some of your process in doing that because, you know, being a creative person who's really, you know, for those of you listeners who haven't listened to Joe's music, you got to listen to it because it's such a unique sound. And I don't know how you would even describe the genre yourself, but it's very creative and unique and different. And to write a song, I can't even imagine what that process looks like or how you get inspired to write and create the way you do.
Yeah, it's different every time. I think that's what I think I like about it. I think that's like with Berklee, I went there and it was another, you know, just like how I was saying, everyone could get A+ in high school. It was like another bar was set where I was like, I want to be the best guitar player in the world. I can't wait to go to this school and learn how to, you know, it was like Hogwarts. Like I could just like, I'm going to be in this great place. I'm going to be the best. And I remember getting there and I wasn't discouraged because everyone was already the best. You know what I mean? It was more like I was turned off by the same way I was turned off by like grading in school, where I was just like, I don't have a drive. I can't fake it because I know that from high school. So I'm not going to even try to, you know, fake myself into like caring about this. Like, you know, I'm going to learn all my scales. I'm going to be the best. I'm going to, you know, and then when I started, basically what I've learned is that there's always been a thing that I need to, like an escape route in everything I am put into. So, you know, you put me in school and, you know, I was like, I found music and a guitar as my like, oh, this is my escape from like this system that I've been put into. Now I can go home and play guitar for 8 hours and no one can tell me what to do. Then I got into Berklee and now someone's going, I can tell you how to play that guitar. And I'm going, oh no, and now this was my only thing to escape. Where do I go now? And then all of a sudden, they give you that laptop and like a little recording interface. And I started like making songs in GarageBand out of thin air of just like, what is the, you know, and that was my escape because no one could tell me how to do that. And I was like, oh, and then I started like skipping classes because I was like so deep into an idea that I was like, I don't want to stop doing this. And like, I don't want to go learn about guitar scales. I'm already doing the thing I love right here and it's music. So you can't convince me to go to this music class, you know, because this is what I'm already wanting to do. So songwriting became the thing and it's yet to be like tested, I think, as far as like, that's been the thing that's been the strongest kind of like foundation escape route that I found of like, really no one can tell you what to do because it's like, it's so like invisible that it's like no one can tell you, oh, well, we're going to teach you how to songwrite. We're going to teach you what you should say and not say, because no one actually knows what works. You know, like there's not actually like a way to know how to do it well. You just, like you just try your best every day. And sometimes you write a bad song or a good song. And I like that randomness to it. I think it just like makes for a really good no one can tell me what to do type of a, setting, which is nice, and you can write with people and you can always collaborate. But even when I've done that, there's been times where it starts to dip into that world that I don't really like. I don't like being so aware that we're all in a room trying to like outsmart each other with lyrics and like it just becomes a little, that like the Nashville country pop song thing, like it becomes very like we're overthinking it. I'm like, no, this is you're ruining the one thing that I'm like, this is like my safety like space here. And now it's like, it's getting messed with. So, but when I'm here, like just doing it, it's, I don't know what's going to happen from second to second, which is like so fun.
You know what's cool about songwriting? When I talk to my students and supervise them to become therapists, and even when I talk to my patients, the clients, one thing that rings true to me is everybody is, there's never going to be another you, ever, in terms of when you were born, your family, the people around you, your thoughts, your feelings, there's so many factors that make an individual who they are. It's impossible to replicate it ever because time passes and you're growing up in a new context. And so as much as AI is starting to create songs and, there's a lot of controversy around that, I think one thing AI can never do is to replicate someone's experience in life. And you're describing your songs come from you. And that's the beauty of songwriting. It comes from you. And sometimes I wonder about this. I'm like, how are there so many songs out there? And sometimes there's similarities and stuff like that, but there's no one song that's exactly the same as another song. Even with movies, I'm like, how did they keep creating something that's a little bit different? It's amazing to me how people can do that. I think that's probably one of the reasons, because everybody is unique in such subtle, different ways.
Yeah, and you don't know it, I think, because if you ask the people who make the songs or make the movies, they always, in some sense, kind of lean towards, I just really wanted to make I love Wes Anderson, and I just wanted, that's my hero, and I really wanted to I've always just been trying to be as good as him, and then what they make is nothing like that, because that's why I always tell people when they start singing to just start doing covers and try to sound like the people that you love. Go ahead and sit down and do a cover and try to sing it like them. And because you are what you just said, super individual and nothing can be, copied, you end up, it's a nice way to kind of fake yourself out into leaning into just being yourself, right? So you're trying to sound like Tom York, but in doing that, you're just letting yourself actually go for something. And then now you get to hear your own voice and you're like, oh, that's what I sound like, and you trick yourself. Mm-hmm. But anytime I make a song, I'm always I think that's the thing with musicians, especially and songwriters, in a group of people, when you talk about songs, the first things we always love to do are go oh man, I love the drums and that just sound like, David Bowie. I love that. I was trying to go for a Talking Heads thing, or I was the guitar line, that super Radiohead stuff. Cause we're just we can't, unless you're Kanye West, you really can't think you're that authentic. It's very, very difficult for most artists to think they're that authentic.
Right.
So you're constantly just coming up with excuses as to and kind of knocking yourself down a little bit, only in the sense of you're so afraid to not be authentic that you're just oh yeah, I was just going for you can't imagine just going, yes, I made this song, it's completely from my genius brain, no one's ever done anything like this. It's very hard to do that, you know what I mean? Even though when you're making music, you are thinking that you are in a headspace of this is the most genius thing ever. Everyone's gonna explode when they hear this, right? Because you have to get to that ego and that level of confidence to be able to create, I think,
to send it.
Yes. And then as soon as it's done and there's other people in the room, and now you start going, yeah, I don't know. And then people are going, holy shit, this is amazing. Or this, I've never heard anything like this or anything. And it's funny because that's the goal. That was your goal, was to make people say that. And then once people do, you're kind of oh no, I don't know. You kind of just have this weird thing where you're Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde or whatever, where it's there's two sides of you where I work so hard to be able to go play shows and I want 1 billion people to show up. And then when people do show up to those shows, on this headline tour I did for the first time, I felt this strange sense of embarrassment of what people are paying to see me, not as much as that's the goal. I get there and I'm on stage and then I'm looking at these people and I'm like, there's a sense of embarrassment because you're like, it is what I wanted, but now that it's in front of me, it's staring me right in the face.
Yeah.
It's almost like, oh, the chase sometimes is like what motivates artists. Like it's just that part of it. You know what I mean? And that's why I think you see so many like famous stories of like movie stars and actors and artists like hating interviews. It's because it's like, that's the part of it that they're like, I don't care about this. The whole point of this was just to do it. I don't actually care about the shit that comes with it after and like being so aware of it, you know, and then when there's people in front of you going, we like your songs, play them.
You think you have, I mean, I'm sensing humility, just knowing you too. I feel like humility is somewhere in this.
Yeah. Humility, but humility in a lot of ways, I think it also is a defense. I think sometimes humility can be like a defense mechanism for like not wanting, because again, I always, whenever I get in a little situation in my head, I just think about if I was the last man on earth and I go, okay, I made a song and I really loved it. That feeling would always stay like exactly how it was when it was initially created. Maybe it would waver, but it would never go up and down based on another person's input or another person's existence on the planet. What are they going to think? And if I didn't have to think about any of that, I would probably just always have that. It's like when they say like if you throw a ball in space, it would just go forever because there's nothing to resist it. I think if there were no other people and I had an idea and I made something, that feeling would sustain forever because I would never have to worry about do people like it, or even if people love it, that still affects that feeling initially how it started. So there's so much coming in. I think a good artist, I think your job is to try to do your best to like, not block it out, but like try to like, don't let your main thing deteriorate too much and get beat up too much, you know, essentially. But I think humility is a nice way to kind of like safely always know that you're safe. It's like a nice safe way to be like, oh no, you know, I'm not that good. You know, you guys are crazy. You know, like that whole thing, I think it just feels like a safe way out. Even though if no one was here, I would just be like, yeah, I do like this song. Like I worked super hard on it. You know,
well, I think to your points before, I'm thinking about an interview I recently heard of Dave Grohl talking about, you know, everybody thought I was such a great drummer in Nirvana. I was just copying music that I liked. That's how I learned how to keep the beat the way I did. Right. And I think that's the cool part of hearing stories of how people start to make their music. And the thing I appreciate about you and the way you create is that you take from inspiration, but you really kind of just do what feels right instead of like, you might be thinking, oh, I like this lick from Bowie or whatever, whoever you like at the moment or whatever you're inspired by, but it flows through you in a really unique, beautiful, creative way. And you're unapologetic about it, right? And I think that's the thin line between humility and overconfidence, right? It's like, you should be like, yeah, I really like this song, or I really like what I just created, because I think that's when we're at our best, is when we can honor and identify with who we are and what we're good at when we do it well. And I got to tell you, this is something that is really difficult for me. Like sometimes even on the podcast, I'll listen to myself. I'm like, oh, that was really good. But I walk out of here and even the producer a couple weeks ago was like, you're really hard on yourself. You're better than you think you are.
Yeah.
But it's the truth. Like it's really difficult. Yeah. But I think, you know, I think you are the same way in that we care so deeply about the things we do that we want it to be done well. And we try our best to be authentic to the thing we love and to create things that make sense. Not because other people are going to love it or care about it, but because it feels right to us in the way we've prepared for it, the way we've produced it, and the way we put things together.
Yeah, totally. And you get brief moments, I think, of that clarity where you aren't being hard on yourself.
Yeah.
And that's what the creative process kind of brings to the table, is like when I'm having a moment down here and like coming up with something that I'm really excited about, it's like, that is like the most like free and disconnected from everything that I can be. And then but it's quick. It's like anything else. It's like when you have the first slice of pizza versus the seventh, like by the first one, you're like, this is the greatest thing ever. I'm so happy. And then by the end you're full and you're like, you can't imagine being hungry ever again after you eat too much, like eat a whole meal. Right.
Exactly.
But before that you were so hungry and you were so excited to eat. And I just think things like that are supposed to be, in little, like, cause you could see it just like in nature and the way things happen. Like sometimes it rains, sometimes it's really sunny out. And it's like, you just don't know what to do. And I think like that small little, like appreciating those small little moments is okay. I think the better you get at recognizing that, like, oh, okay, like I'm not supposed to feel perfectly clear all of the time.
Yes.
It's almost like the way out of that being hard on yourself feeling is like recognizing in real time that it's like, oh, like I can't even care about this because like, this isn't what's supposed to be. I can't just always be in that headspace of like, I feel good right now, you know, and it's okay. But it's when you don't know that and you're confused, your mind can eat itself, you know, because it just thinks like, what, I need to care more, you know, it's crazy.
I don't know if I ever told both of you guys this, but there's this Buddhist philosophy in meditation that I really love, is this idea of this in-between space. It's like the in between your in-breath and your out-breath is like this in-between space, and they call it the bardo. And the in-between space is like so uncomfortable because like you don't know what you're supposed to be doing there. And I think the same goes for like the creative process, because there's like that, you have this spark of like excitement and enthusiasm to do this thing. And then you start working on it. And sometimes you get into that muddy spot where it's like not super clear, like you're describing. And it's like, it's the bardo, it's the in-between. And my meditation teacher taught me about this because there's all these points in our lives that sometimes feels sort of uncomfortable. And you're like, I don't really know what I'm supposed to be doing here. And I think, and I'm going to relate this back to mental health for a second, because I know that a lot of people, especially in the creative arts and world, when you're in that in-between space, you can get really down on yourself and feel like there's, the world's against you. You get so stuck. And, this is sometimes where people turn to different alternatives to like escape from that feeling, because it's really not always a good feeling. But I would argue, and I wonder what you think, is sometimes in that in-between space, if you give yourself enough space and time there, that's where you can get to that clarity of that aha moment where things start to come together and you're like, yes. But it's difficult to like sit in it and face it and just be there and wait it out to get to the other side.
Yeah. I mean, it's like when you're in a waiting room and you grab your phone, you are smothering any chance that you have of like, just being there. You just like aren't letting yourself, you're not letting yourself exist in neutral. Like that's not good, I don't think, for the engine. Like you need to sometimes be able to just sit there and like.
It's a great metaphor.
We just have so much stuff now. We have so much stuff to distract. We have so many, and there's always that's been around since the beginning of time. It's just, maybe it's not a phone, but like, there's going and hanging out with people, because like you don't want to work on your thing. So you're like, oh, everyone's going to the bar. Like I'll go to the bar. And then, which it's funny because in a lot of times, like in more times than not, when I go and I've always been very, like resistant to the like, hey, we're all going out to this bar on a Friday night to like have fun. And like, we worked all week and like, we don't do a weird creative thing like you. So like we've been working all week. We want to go out. And I'm like, I've always been so resistant to it because I was just like, okay, but like, what are we doing? Like, what's the objective? Like, that's my fun is like making and doing things, I don't understand the idea of like, just like doing nothing, I never like in high school, that was the same thing. I was more interested in like, hey, we're going to like try to make a movie like in my backyard, or we're going to try to like record or make a song or something instead of go to the high school party. Like I became uninterested in those kinds of things early on because I was finding the fun in the like accomplishment of something. And then, the times I finally did give in to like, let's go to the bar. Like I'll go with you guys. And like, now I'm stuck. I don't have a guitar. I can't do anything. That's where I would get the best lyrics or the best feelings that I was gonna eventually a week later or a month or a year later would come up in my songwriting because I'm experiencing real life. Like, and I thought about it and I was like, oh yeah, of course the like night out at a bar doing absolutely nothing, but just like having fun with no objective and you're not going to achieve anything. And like, the world is not going to change like based on you going to a bar. And it's like, oh no, that is what changes the world. It's as much as we think that it's not, it's like, that's what the foundation and the ingredients of all that is. Without any of those things, writing a song, lyrics doesn't mean anything. Like there's no point to doing stuff if there aren't these extremely human experiences that you're having. And I'll go to a bar or a club or something and I'd have weird moments of like this clarity of like watching everyone dance to a song that came on. And I was watching people use the music and I was like, oh, this is the whole point. This is the best it gets. Like I think I'm so cool and advanced because I can create this stuff and like think of ideas. I'm so smart and deep. And then I watched the girl dancing to like Dancing Queen. And I'm like, that's the best thing in the world. That's so much deeper and so much better than anything I will ever do. Like I almost wish I couldn't make music because I would love to be able to experience music like that. Like I think the best songwriters in the world are the people that can't write songs. Like, because they're truly like in it. Like they're truly like, you know, just I want to know what people hear when they hear music without thinking of, oh, I want to do that. Like it's such an amazing thing. And I think like when I can, the more stuff you experience that seems like every day, whatever, that's the deepest you can get, because that is like, that's what AI cannot write. You know, like you can't write that stuff into a thing. You know what I mean? So I think that's why we have unlimited song ideas and movies.
It's like the, you know, like someone who writes music, whatever genre you're in, you know, they may write like the early experiences in their life, inspire them to write about tough experiences they've gone through and challenges, and they write about it. It's cathartic for them. And as they become rich and famous, I don't know if this is true or not. Maybe you can check me on this, but I feel like sometimes they become rich and famous. Their life is so different. They're like, what do I write about now? Having like $1 million houses? And like, I don't think I want to write about that. There's not too much substance there.
Yeah.
So like, you know, to your point, like I think in life, we're always trying to like recalibrate where we're at, knowing ourselves, and you know yourself really well. And it's a big part of therapy is learning about yourself. And I feel like as we go through life, we're making adjustments. We're trying to recalibrate so we don't kind of get fixed in one aspect of life, but we kind of expand it and to experience what life has to offer for us. And that, you know, that takes reflection and honesty and all the other, you know, values that we can uphold along the way.
Totally. Yeah. It's always changing. People are always figuring themselves out, you know?
I think to your point, we went to a concert last night to see Shovels and Rope and the Wood Brothers. And I was just thinking, I'm like, for me at least, I grew up so differently than these artists did. And they're writing lyrics about their experience. And even though I didn't experience what they experienced, they lived in very different places than we grew up in. I'm like, I can still connect to the music. I can still be a part of this experience and really appreciate it, even though it's so different. And I think that's such a cool part about being a performer and an artist, is that you're able to make and create things that kind of transcend space, time, sometimes age and culture. And it's so cool. It's such an incredible gift that you have.
Brings people together like food does.
Yeah, no, it's fun. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's no thinking involved. You know what I mean? It's most things you think about before. It's like, think about like politics. Like that's why politics gets so, like everyone deep down, not even that deep down, but I think everyone hates politics. They hate the world where we stand a certain way and we want them to speak. It's funny. It's like when people are like, they talk about a politician in a way where they're like, you know, they're not like classy. Like I like how they did that because they handled that in a classy way. Like we're so aware of all these things and there's so much thinking involved before, you know, who you're going to vote for and all. There's all of that. And then like you take a bite, you have a bite of a Big Mac. You just go, this is delicious. And everyone likes it. And no one has to, there's no fighting. There's no talking. It's just like, and I think music is the same way. It like totally like invades you. It just goes right in and like you can't stop it. And like there's so many other things that you can stop and like filter appropriately for you, what you want, and then let it in. And then it comes back out in such a weird, distorted way. And then that's why the craziest things we always hear about are like politics and stuff, that you hear these crazy stories of things happening. And it's like, that's just because it's like someone just so analyzing everything so much that they've created an identity of their identity. And like, that's what they want everyone to see them as and what they stand for. And it's like, that's why I think everyone loves music, is because it kind of goes away from all that. And then people get mad at artists when they talk about politics, I think for that reason, because I was always very confused. Like my dad would always be like, me growing up, I remember he would always hate Bruce Springsteen. And like, he'd be like, oh, he just rants on stage for 4 hours about, like this and that. And I think whenever someone says something or does anything, like I always just try to look at like, there's a reason for everything. So like my dad being pissed off at that, let me think about like, why is he angry? And I think it's because music is supposed to be this thing that turns you off a little, like turns your brain off a little bit and just lets you feel. And when someone starts talking about those things that go against that, it kind of like makes you like, oh, what the hell, And I don't think I remember always arguing or trying to argue with him about like that. And I would just be like, well, no, I mean, like, if that's how he feels, because I was looking at it from an artist perspective, going, that's how he feels. Let him, him writing a song is no different than him talking about something, or, but I think now I understand that I think, people just take music extremely seriously because it is such a visceral thing that when it starts getting commercialized or anything, everyone has a problem with it, because I think it's like, this is our one thing. Like, don't take this like amazing thing and bring it so into this like human, like very, this very like commercialized, like self-aware, world that we have.
Yeah, and it becomes a community of people who are different than each other coming together and experiencing it. And it's funny, we're watching live music. Sometimes like I don't even know what the lyrics are sometimes at a live show. Like I can't make out the lyrics sometimes, but I'm like, but I like the vibe and I'm vibing with it, and you can appreciate that. And that's a really cool thing about music. You're like, I don't even know what they're talking about. We saw this really cool band called Ripe. They're actually from Boston, and they're up and coming band. And really,
I played with them, and they lived on my floor, and I played a show with them.
No way.
And I was like, and we were in the middle of like Ohio. And I found out this other band is on the bill. It was for a radio thing. Like it was just a radio event. And all of a sudden I see them and I'm like, I think you were on my floor. All of them. And they were like, no way. And like, we all just realized like we all went to Berkeley, and like,
that's awesome.
It was kind of, I made a joke that I was like, I left after a year. They're like, yeah, we graduated. I was like, I guess you guys just spent more money to get to the same place. I was laughing with them.
That's funny. But they have such a great vibe like you do.
It was pretty funny how we crossed paths.
That's really cool.
Yeah, they're so much fun. They're so nice. Yeah.
So to that same point, thinking about vibe, and you've just come off of your first headlining tour. What was that like? What was it like to like get out there and know that you were the band that they were coming to see?
It started, like I was saying, very embarrassing, or whatever the word is, because I was just kind of like I remember the tour went up. Like I remember getting the dates from my manager and booking agent, and like seeing all these venues and like the states and cities they were in. And I was like, what? Like, what do you mean? Like Chicago? Like no one's going to go to that. You guys are trying to like, it feels a lot like throwing a birthday party for yourself and being terrified that no one's going to come. So you invite too many people, and you like, you know what I mean? It's like, that's what it felt like every single day. I was in that headspace, but, and then I was like, okay, I'm going to go. And then I started getting, hearing, hey, we just sold out Washington DC, but weeks out of the tour. And I was like, really? And then he's like, yeah, and there's only like 10 tickets left in Chicago. And like, so now it's exciting. Cause again, it's like, I'm like, really, this is amazing. Like, this is what I want. But also that embarrassment of like, well, now I know there's people there that are like, hey, like when you open, they don't expect anything from you. Like you're a bonus if you're good, and you're a zero if you're not good. You're not negative though. You're not taking away from their experience. You're just zero, and that's okay. So there's a lack of pressure there. Like you can just walk out there and you're safe no matter what. And especially if you think you're pretty good, like you're going to give them a little more than 0 at least even on a bad night. So now though, I was like, they paid to see me. Like this is like, they already are saying, we think you're good, go. It's like, oh, okay, that's a different, I'm walking out there with less like an underdog, like punching up, and a little more like, okay, I need to like, I need to like be in charge of everyone's like fun and like make sure everyone is like getting what they want and what they paid for. Or so I thought, like, this is what I thought. And then as soon as the first show happened, Washington, DC, the very first show, I walked out and it was like, it was one of those things where I was embarrassed or whatever, or I was so like, oh my God, this is so crazy that this is happening. And then as soon as I was out there, it was like, of course, like I was so ready to do it.
Nice.
Because like, of course I am. This is what I've been practicing for. And this is what I've been wanting and working towards. And then, but I just think like with musicians and artists and stuff, like you're always at your best when you're not when you're not thinking so much, right? So as soon as I go on stage, the brain has to go off. There's nothing I can do about that. I can no longer sit there and think and analyze and look at my phone. Like, this is it. I'm on the stage. And that's when I was like having so much fun because everyone was there. It was easy. Of course, they already think you're good. This is so easy. You know, like all the things that were terrifying and scary to me became the like, the weapons. Those were all the things that I needed to be able to make a good show. I was like, this is so easy. I started thinking about other bands that I opened for. I was like, they had it so easy. This is just, you walk out and everyone's like, everyone's already on your team, you know, like what the hell? Yeah. So it was great. And then meeting people after was so great because, you know, like opening and you meet someone after, they're really excited about the live show that they just saw. Right. And so if they say, that was great, I loved it. Like, you know, that's an amazing conversation. But when they're there because they've already heard your music and they've had a year and they've had years of listening to it or whatever, it's a very different conversation after, because now they're not just saying like, you killed it tonight. It's a little more like there's a deeper meaning, and they're kind of like, I've been listening to you since, 2020, like when the pandemic started, and, this song means this to me. It's like there was so much more detail and so much more depth that I, wasn't like, like taking in and just talking to those people. And it was like so crazy because it's like everything everyone says when they talk about, if they really like my music or something, the reason I think it feels good or whatever isn't because it's like, oh, we think you're so good. It feels good because they're mirroring the things I felt in that 3 a.m. moment when I like came up with that song and was like, like I find it like that. That's what I've been trying to get out of me. And then you have to say it to everyone. Yeah. And then when they come up to you and they say, we get it. We hear the language that you're speaking. That is your own language. You're like, oh my God, it's crazy that you actually like heard that language I was speaking. Cause like I didn't think anyone else would understand that, So that's kind of what it is that you think that's that embarrassment, I think, is that you're kind of like, you feel like a fool because you're singing in your own, you feel like you're in a different language that you're like, no one's going to get this, right? And then when they do, it feels great because you're like, you're just kind of like, you feel so, it's such a human experience of like, it transcends everything else. And you're just like having this very, like, you feel understood or something, more than ever, and it's just, it's always better with other people, like I can only do so much by myself in a room to make myself, feel good or content. Like we need each other to really, I think like that's the whole point. The whole point is that, we're all together in it. So whenever you can connect to someone else in that way, it's like, that'll last you your whole life. It's great.
And if you get a chance to go see Joe perform live, not only is his music amazing, but the stage performance between you and the guys, the energy is just so cool. But I kind of feel like we started with the seed that we planted of like an onion, and then we went right to the middle of the onion instead of talking about the outward layers. And if you don't mind, I know we're getting close on time, but can we talk a little bit about like that whole COVID time? Because I feel like it was really difficult for a lot of people. I actually think you might have enjoyed it, being on your own, just doing your thing and building things. But you also were alone, but with like this huge growing fan base that came out of nowhere. that just became like an extended family who I most certainly have not met many of. But tell us a little bit about that, because that was pretty much, I would say, a huge pivotal point for you in your career.
Yeah, it was the end of the world and the beginning of, I guess, my world. It was really, really weird. But yeah, I mean, it was like the band ended like day one of COVID, essentially, I guess you could say.
Oh, wait, I was just talking about this last night.
That was
your show was the last show I saw live up here in Cambridge at the Middle East, like right before the world ended. Oh, wow. Remember that? It was like maybe 2 days before everything closed down. I was like one of like a handful of people who were not scared to go.
Yeah. And it was like that was like a major city too. So it was like, that was where it was, people were saying like, getting freaked out the most was like, there's so many people and, but it still wasn't as at the forefront yet. Like there were still a few more days left before like they really started like saying like it's crazy, like everyone go inside. Yeah. So, those shows are the last shows we played, and like COVID really started, and it was like, I think for everyone, COVID was a positive thing only in the sense of like, it forced you to, look at do all that work I did when I was in high school by not going to parties, and like, you're alone now. Like you're forced to look at yourself and figure out what you like and don't like. And, people were now, instead, husbands, like couples and stuff, like going to work all day and working a 9 to 5 and coming back and meeting up for dinner and going to bed, now experience 24 hours of the day together. That's a little different. You know what I mean? Like that's different. So that forced people. And I think like for us, it was the same thing. It was like, okay, there's no shows, there's no music videos, there's no, this or that, it's all about music. It's all about like loving music. And like, when you take away all those other distractions, which like I consider like touring and all those things, like distractions in a positive way, because they kind of like spread things, across a little wider. Now it's all just sitting in the basement and making music. So you better love this. You know what I mean? Just like couples, it's like, you're stuck in the same house, so you better love this, So I was, and for me, I was like, this is great. This is like what I've always done anyway. Mm-hmm. But for everyone else, I could just sense more of like whoa, like this is what you meant by like, you love music? Like, this is crazy. That's kind of what it felt like. So it just kind of crumbled naturally, which is, it's in a weird way, it's like a positive thing. Like, I really think it's a blessing in that sense of everyone's true colors came out because there was nowhere to hide. You kind of couldn't come up with an excuse to stay another year or stay another week in the band, because it was like, there's no tour, there's no job for you unless you're okay with just sitting here and being immersed in it. And so that happened. And then I was just kind of like, this thing I envisioned so clearly was gone. Like, that was the way. It was like people have dreams and stuff, and then like usually they like nicely fade to black or whatever, right? Mine was just like, the movie's over like halfway through.
Like so many people during COVID. Yeah.
Now I don't know. Yeah. Just like, what do you do? Like businesses that probably just started had to close. It's like, you have such a vision and it's forced to be cut completely short. And I think I had one day of like panic attacks, like just going crazy, walking around, like, what am I going to do? Like, it felt like my arm was cut off. Mm-hmm. And I don't know I have no clue what to do now. And then the next day, and this is what I think is interesting about like human beings, is like the next day it was like, I had the opposite feeling. I was like, okay, this is great. I'm ready to go. Like, let's go. And it was weird because I didn't think that was going to happen. You can't imagine a world where you're ever going to get over this. And then the next day it was like, not only am I over it, but I think like, I'm happy of how this is happening. I'm happy of how life is kind of like making me do this right now. Like, this is better.
I'm going to do something with it.
And I didn't expect that. Yeah. And like, I think it's just because, naturally, I think people are just good at being resilient to things when there isn't gray area, when there isn't room for interpretation. Like, it's just like, this is what's happening. Like, the world's shutting down. Your band is done. What are you going to do? Like, there was nothing for me to come back with, right? So that happened, and I just retreated to the basement and just started. I didn't start anything. I just kept doing what I've always done. And like, I literally was like, this is great because everyone always wants to go to the beach or like go to bars and stuff. And now I'm not the freak. Like everyone's stuck inside. I'm like, this is amazing. Like that is all the sun. That's all the sunlight that I need.
They became your people.
But so yes, yeah, they were all like, that's kind of what it felt like. It felt like with the band, and then everyone for that matter was just kind of like, had like it's almost like COVID forced everyone to
become Joe Perella.
See how I see the world. Like just like, yes, exactly. Everyone was like, this is what you do every day. This is what you've been doing your whole life. I'm like, yeah, I really love like being locked in a room and not allowed to leave.
Joe,
so that was kind of it. Yeah.
Joe, it's such a great story of adapting and evolving, and we're almost at the time. So I want to give a quick shout out to your brother, who I know, Rob, your brother Rob, who also has done his own evolution in what he's doing with his life. Can you just give a quick shout out to what he's been up to in terms of his evolution in his career and his life?
Yeah. Yeah, he's always been like also very, very creative, but I think for him it was more in ways that, wasn't just like, oh, music, done. Like for me, it was like day one, I figured out it was music and that was it. I think for him, he was able to be creative. Like he's so much more creative than I am in the sense of like, he finds a way to be creative about things that don't necessarily offer creativity to be kind of like inflicted on it. Right. So if you made him go make a garden, he would do it in a way that you're like, oh my God, so he's always had that brain and very artistic, and cooking, I think, became the thing that he resonated with the most, I think, because, you can do anything with that. It's endless. You can change it. You can create something and then people get joy out of it. I think that's what's cool is like, I think it was a thing that the first thing that he made something and it connected with people and he saw it in real time. And I think that happened to me when I was little with music, where I think for him, he would just be drawing a picture in his room and no one would really clap. You know what I mean? It's not the same thing. So I think cooking, he started getting feedback, and I think that like felt good, and I think he started leaning into it. And he worked in Asbury Park at Pascal and Sabine, which was where we were all living in Asbury Park during that before COVID, and it was like a really high end fancy restaurant. And within a couple of months, he was just moving his way up. They all loved him. He was killing it. And then he moved to Nashville, and now he's working at like the really, really nice Hilton restaurant that's there. And it's like really, really intense, fancy food that I don't even understand how he learned these things. It's one of those things where I'm like, how did you do this? I never saw you cooking anything other than like nachos with me at 4 a.m, in like high school. So it's pretty amazing. But yeah, he's like kind of running the show. He's running his kitchen essentially at this huge restaurant. Yeah, it's so cool. So yeah, he's killing it, and he's in Nashville. He's in like a cool town, like really, really doing it. And it's like but it was such a more sneaky kind of like rise to that, or path to that, where mine has always just been like, again, I haven't changed doing what I do since I was 5 years old. Where with him, I think it was a little more like he was in like a general category, I think, in his own mind.
Yeah, creative.
I think he just had to feel around a little longer for exactly what it was. And I think he found it. So I think he's just so stoked to be doing that. Yeah.
I think it's so cool that both of you found ways to express yourselves where people get to connect around the things you create, right? Around food, around music. And for you, I was alluding to your time in quarantine as also a time where you connected with so many people through your music and through social media, which I know social media is not any of our thing that we love, but it's also become an outlet to connect with people, to share some of the things we create. And I will say that, I'm sure people come to Rob's restaurant from all around the world to visit the city and get to experience what he creates and his expressions. just the way, the people that follow you on Instagram and TikTok and all these great pieces of yourself that you share with the world, that people are like, yeah, I really love that. I love the authenticity. I like the creativity. I like the way you're connecting without losing a part of yourself. And I really appreciate that so much about both you and Rob and, the guys in your band who have been a part of this process with you. And, it's led to so many great things. And I will be a little bit of your PR person that, recently you signed with Atlantic Records and have kind of evolved your work as an artist and now playing. I mean, I know you guys did this with Deal Casino too, but, playing these big music festivals and these great shows. Yeah. And I don't know if there's any you want to plug. I will plug that, the one in Ocean City, Maryland. I got tickets to come see you.
Yeah, that's the only one. Yeah.
And we'll give it up. We'll give it up for our Aunt Jen, our Jame.
My boy.
She's like the matriarch of our family at this stage. But I will joke and say that you're opening for the Lumineers. You happen to be playing on the same day that they're headlining that day of the festival, which is pretty cool. That's her favorite band, besides you, of course.
Yeah.
But I think it's just so beautiful how you've been able to hone your craft, stay dedicated to what you love, figure out the right people to be involved in this journey while still staying true to yourself and just being like, this is what I'm going to do. This is how I'm going to do it. And I know that the people in your life, Emily included, and our family, and everybody outside of our family who just loves and supports you, I hope you feel the love and the energy that we all give to you as you are on this journey. And we're so proud of your dedication and your persistence. And, we know it's no easy task to stay up till 5 a.m. and do what you love, because it just, it sustains you, right? It's not like I have to do this. Yeah. It's because you feel that it's a part of you that needs to be happening. And it's a beautiful thing. And we are so proud of you and so glad to have this conversation with you. I feel like we could talk forever, and we likely will. And we're just glad to have you here on the show.
Great.
Any
of course, this is really good.
Any parting words? We work with a lot of young people and young adults who are just really trying to find their path. And I think you've given so many nuggets of inspiration throughout our time together. But any final thoughts for somebody who, might be feeling some resistance to what they think they should be doing and are trying to figure out what they should do next?
The only thing now, I said this at all the headlining shows I did. I would talk about how, and I didn't realize it until I told the story. Like the story kept evolving, because as I told it, I was learning about kind of like what happened. But I kept doing these things that were mistakes, I thought, right? So I went to Berkeley and then I left because I go, oh, this wasn't for me. And then I thought I need to go to William Patterson because it's a university to like get the college experience. Like, I thought that's what I was missing. And then I get there and I was like, oh my God, I made another mistake. Like all of my roommates are like the jocks who made fun of me in high school for playing music. And then I left there and moved to Belmar and like, now I'm going to pursue music. I dropped out of college. Okay, here we go. And then I got like fired from my waiting on tables job. Like, and it was just mistake after mistake. And I kept thinking like all this stuff. And then I at the end of that whole thing that I would say, but if you make enough mistakes, you might end up in like, whatever city we were in with a sold out show or whatever. Right. So my point, I guess, would just be that because of social media, it seems like everyone gets everything right all the time, like on the first try, like, and it's past, we used to look at social media as negative because everyone looked perfect. I think we're past that. I think like people know that that's all fake. Mm-hmm. But now I think it's almost a deeper thing where it's like you see people being successful, which is worse. No one wants to be more successful. Like everyone wants to have some level of success. So I would say don't worry or look at that, but realize that all the mistakes you make are so much more important than all the, right decisions you make, because like COVID, like I thought everything was so over, like I couldn't even imagine Atlantic Records being like a thing, ever, once COVID hit and the band ended. So everything seems like a mistake or a bad moment. And it's always like I said, I think naturally we're super resilient. So those are the moments that are going to make you push off the wall and just slingshot towards this thing that you're actually trying to go toward. You were actually going away from it, but now you're being slingshotted towards it. So I think welcome that, embrace all of the terrible things.
That's great. That's great. And I will say, as a therapist, psychologist, working with individuals who reflect on sometimes, like, don't make things worse than they need to be, like by becoming destructive with like drugs, alcohol, or rebelling for no other reason, just for the sake of rebelling. Because I've worked with so many people, they look back and they regret that. And now they're just learning to become true to who they are and to follow their path the way you have, to know that there is a guide somewhere. If you can utilize your support system to get through the hard times and have clarity that will guide you to your authentic self, because your authentic self is not always that, destructive version of yourself. That's just a way of coping. But if you can find healthier ways of coping by using your support system, having moments of clarity and looking into yourself, it's a huge thing. So just a plug for people out there, for therapy, if it's useful to you, it depends on the person.
Yeah. And find your people, find your friends, you don't need a million friends. You don't need, you don't need to be in a relationship with the perfect person. You just need to let that happen and find the people that, I think make you feel like yourself the most. I think that's the thing. I always hear people trying to get in relationships, and obviously I've been with Emily forever. So I'm like always so interested in people dating and all this stuff. And they're all just talking about, the way they're like on an app looking. I'm like, man, if I saw Emily right now and I just had to base it on one thing, I don't know what I would do, because there's so much more baked into that it's like, the idea of just thinking like, oh, this person likes hiking on their thing. So like, that's nice. I also like hiking. I hate hiking. Emily loves hiking. We are completely opposite. Like, my best friends are very similar, maybe in one world, but like most of the people I know, I'm opposite from. And like, those are the people I love to be with the most, because one, they open your mind to other things. And two, they still do something that makes me be me the most I can be. And like, that's, I think, so much more valuable than like, well, we're both, you meet like the couple who's like the cool Brooklyn couple, and they're both like really cool. And you're like, okay, but then they have no chemistry. And you're like, just because you guys both like shopping and like, watching A24 movies doesn't mean that like you should be friends or even together. It's like, I think we're in that world though now where there's so many categories that people can be in that we think we can actually link up with them based on, we have the same stuff and the same, like a Venn diagram or something. And it's like, no, we're just go meet a bunch of people and be open to the people that are like, not like you at all, because those are probably the ones that you're going to like, because you're not going to just be, there's not going to be two of you. That's a good thing. You know what I mean?
It's so important. And I think living your most authentic self and your most authentic life is often what allows for you to find your passion and live it. And if you're lucky enough, make it into a career that sustains you.
Yeah.
So grateful for this conversation. We'll keep it going, and we're rooting for you every day. And we love you. And we're can't wait to see you at the next show.
Me too.
And the next gathering.
Yeah, we love you, Joe.
Yeah.
Thanks,
love
man.
you too, guys. Thank you for having me on here. This is so cool.
Yeah, it's awesome. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for tuning in to the ReidConnect-Ed Podcast. Please remember that this is a podcast intended to educate and share ideas, but it is not a substitute for professional care that may be beneficial to you at different points of your life. If you are in need of support, please contact your primary care physician, local hospital, educational institution, or support staff at your place of employment to seek out referrals for what may be most helpful for you. Ideas shared here have been shaped by many years of training, incredible mentors, research, theory, evidence-based practices, and our work with individuals over the years, but it's not intended to represent opinions of those we work with or who we are affiliated with. The ReidConnect-Ed Podcast is hosted by siblings Alexis Reid and Dr. Gerald Reid. Original music is written and recorded by Gerald Reid. Editing and recording was done by Cybersound Studios. If you want to follow along on this journey with us, the ReidConnect-Ed Podcast will be releasing new episodes every 2 weeks each season. So please subscribe for updates and notifications. Feel free to also follow us on Instagram at ReidConnect-Ed Podcast, That's ReidConnect-Ed Podcast, and Twitter at ReidConnect-Ed. We are grateful for you joining us and look forward to future episodes. In the meanwhile, be curious, be open, and be well.